Millionaire recognizes his ex-girlfriend living on the street as a beggar, is horrified to discover the reason. The streets of New York City were bustling with activity on that spring morning. Jack Thompson, impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit, walked briskly along the sidewalks of Fifth Avenue. His phone rang incessantly, reminding him of the countless meetings and decisions that awaited him in his glass and steel tower. At 45, Jack was the very image of success. He had built a tech empire from scratch, and his face regularly adorned the covers of business magazines. However, as he dodged hurried tourists and office workers, a feeling of emptiness invaded him, as it always did when he allowed himself to let his guard down. It was then that he saw her. On the street corner next to a dilapidated flower stand, a familiar figure caught his attention. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he recognized her. Lucy Martinez, his ex-girlfriend from his youth, the love he thought he had forgotten. But this Lucy was barely a shadow of the woman he remembered. Her hair, once silky and shiny, looked dull and unkempt. Her clothes, once elegant, now looked worn and too big for her thin frame. Her eyes, which once sparkled with ambition and joy, now showed a deep sadness. Jack stopped in his tracks, unable to process the scene before him. Lucy, lost in her thoughts, hadn't noticed him yet. For a moment, he considered going on his way, pretending he hadn't seen her, but something inside him, a mixture of curiosity and an emotion he couldn't name, compelled him to approach. Lucy. His voice sounded more uncertain than he would have liked. She looked up, surprised. Recognition flashed in her eyes, quickly followed by a mixture of shame and resignation. "Jack," she replied, quietly, "it's been a long time." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, laden with unasked questions and bittersweet memories. Jack observed how Lucy shrank slightly, as if she wanted to disappear. "How have you been?" he asked, aware of how inadequate the question sounded given the circumstances. Lucy gave a sad smile. "I've had better days," she replied with a touch of irony. Jack nodded, not knowing what to say. His mind traveled back to their college years, when they both shared dreams of conquest and success. Lucy had been brilliant, ambitious, full of life. Seeing her now so changed caused him a pang of pain and guilt. "Do you have time for a coffee?" The words left his mouth before he could think about them. Lucy hesitated, looking around as if searching for an exit. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, she nodded. "I suppose so," she said, in a voice that suggested she had nothing left to lose. As they walked to the nearest coffee shop, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the twists and turns life takes. How had they come to this point? What had happened to Lucy in all these years? And more importantly, why did he feel that this encounter was going to change his life forever? What neither of them knew at that moment was that this casual encounter on the streets of New York was just the beginning of a story that would test their hearts, reveal long-kept secrets, and force them to face their past in order to look to the future. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small establishment where Jack and Lucy sat down, a world apart from the bustle of the New York streets. The polished wooden table between them seemed like an abyss, laden with years of silence and divergent paths. Jack observed Lucy as she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee. Her hands, once well cared for and elegant, now showed signs of hard work and neglect. A lump formed in his throat as he thought about how much things had changed. "What happened, Lucy?" he finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity and concern. "The last time we saw each other, you had the world at your feet. You were about to graduate with honors. You had job offers from the best companies." Lucy looked up, a shadow of her old fire flashing in her eyes for an instant. "Life, Jack. Life happened," she replied with a bitter laugh. "Not everyone is lucky enough to have their dreams come." "True." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat, aware that his success now seemed like a mockery in the face of Lucy's situation. "Can I ask what happened after we broke up?" Lucy took a sip of coffee, as if seeking strength in the bitter drink. "After our breakup, I felt lost. You were my anchor, my companion on the road to success. Without you, everything seemed less bright, less attainable." She paused, lost in her memories. I met someone who seemed to understand my pain, who promised to take care of me and support me. At first, everything was perfect. He was attentive, caring, but things gradually changed. Jack listened attentively, a bad feeling growing in his chest. He became controlling, Lucy continued, her voice barely a whisper. He started isolating me from my friends and family. He criticized every decision I made before I knew it. I had left my job. I had lost contact with everyone who mattered to me. And the worst part is that I believed it was my fault, that I wasn't good enough. Jack felt anger growing inside him. Lucy, that's abuse. Why didn't you seek help? She shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. It's not that easy, Jack. When you're in that situation, you don't see clearly. You convince yourself that things will get better, that if you just try a little harder, everything will go back to how it was at the beginning. How long? Jack couldn't finish the question. 7 years, Lucy replied, her voice breaking slightly. 7 years of my life that vanished. When I finally found the strength to leave, I had nothing. No job, no savings, no friends to turn to. I've been trying to rebuild my life since then, but it's hard when it seems like the world has moved on without you. Jack reached out across the table, hesitating for a moment before taking Lucy's hand. I'm so sorry, Lucy. If I had known. She gently withdrew her hand. It's not your fault, Jack. We each made our decisions. You followed your path and became the successful man you always dreamed of being. I made some bad decisions. But you're free now, Jack said, trying to find a ray of hope. You can start over. Lucy laughed joylessly. Start over? At my age? With no work experience in years, no contacts, not a penny to my name? It's not that easy, Jack. The world isn't kind to women who have been out of the game for so long. Jack felt something stirring inside him, a mixture of guilt, compassion, and a deeper feeling he dared not name. Let me help you, he said impulsively. Lucy looked at him in surprise. Help me? Why would you do that? Because we were once more than friends, Lucy. Because we shared dreams and hopes, and because no one deserves to go through what you've been through without a chance to recover. She looked at him intently, searching for some hidden motive in his eyes. I don't need your charity, Jack. It's not charity, he replied firmly. It's an opportunity the same. Opportunity you gave me years ago when you believed in me and my crazy ideas of starting a company. Let me return the favor. Lucy seemed to be fighting an internal battle. Her pride struggled against the need and hope for a better future. Finally, with a sigh of surrender, she nodded slightly. Okay, she said quietly. I accept your help. But on one condition. This is a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back every penny when I'm back, on my feet. Jack smiled, feeling something inside him light up. Deal. As they left the coffee shop, neither of them was aware of how this decision was going to change their lives forever. The past they thought was buried was about to resurface, bringing with it secrets that would shake the foundations of everything. They thought they knew about themselves and each other. The story of Jack and Lucy was just beginning to unfold, and fate had surprises in store that neither of them could imagine. The days following the reunion at the coffee shop were a whirlwind of activity. Jack, moved by a mixture of compassion and a deeper feeling he still dared not name, devoted himself body and soul to helping Lucy rebuild her life. The first step was to find her a decent place to live. Jack insisted on renting a small but cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Brooklyn. Lucy protested at first, arguing that it was too much, but Jack was inflexible. It's only temporary, he assured her. Until you can support yourself, Lucy reluctantly accepted, but Jack could see the relief in her eyes when they entered the apartment for the first time. It was modest compared to what he was used to, but for Lucy it represented a new beginning, a safe space after years of instability. The next step was to help her find a job. This proved to be more challenging. Despite her brilliant academic record, the years out of the job market had left Lucy at a disadvantage. Many employers looked at her skeptically when they saw the gap in her resume. Jack used his contacts, pulled strings, but made sure not to push too hard. He wanted Lucy to get the job on her own merits, not as a favor to him. Finally, after weeks of searching and interviews, Lucy got a position at a small publishing house. It wasn't her dream job, but it was a start, an opportunity to prove her worth and rebuild her confidence. Throughout this process, Jack and Lucy spent a lot of time together. At first, their interactions were tinged with awkwardness and unresolved tension. There was too much history between them, too many unexpressed feelings, but little by little, as they worked together on the project of rebuilding Lucy as Jack's jokingly called it, the barriers began to fall. Shared laughter over college memories, long conversations about their lives and dreams, moments of vulnerability when Lucy allowed herself to cry and Jack comforted her in silence. For Jack, this process was awakening emotions he thought forgotten. He found himself thinking about Lucy constantly, worrying about her well-being, longing for her company. His life, which previously revolved exclusively around his work and success, now had a new center of gravity. Lucy, for her part, struggled with mixed feelings. She was deeply grateful for Jack's help, but at the same time felt guilty. Not only for accepting his help, but for the secret she kept, a secret that weighed more and more on her conscience. One night, after celebrating Lucy getting her first raise at the publishing house, they were sitting on the small balcony of the apartment, sharing a bottle of wine. "I've never properly thanked you," Lucy suddenly said, looking at Jack with bright eyes, "for everything you've done for me." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the wine. "You don't have to thank me for anything. I do it because I want to, because I care about you." Lucy looked at him intently, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "Why, Jack? Why do you care so much after all these years?" Jack took a sip of wine, searching for the right words. "Because you never stopped mattering to me, Lucy. Even when our paths separated, a part of me always wondered what had become of you, if you had achieved your dreams." He moved a little closer to her, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And now that I've found you again, I realize that all my success, all my money, mean nothing if I can't share them with someone who really matters to me." Lucy felt her heart racing. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future with Jack, a life where the past was behind them and they could start anew. But then, the weight of her secret fell on her like a slab. "Jack, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, expectant, not knowing that the words he was about to hear would change his life forever. But before Lucy could continue, the doorbell of the apartment rang, breaking the moment. It was Lucy's neighbor, asking for help with an urgent domestic problem. The moment had passed. Lucy apologized and went to help her neighbor, leaving Jack alone on the balcony, confused and a little frustrated. As Jack waited, he couldn't stop thinking about what Lucy had been about to tell him. What secret was she keeping? And why did he feel that it was something that could change everything between them? The following days after the almost moment of revelation on the balcony were charged with unresolved tension. Lucy seemed to avoid being alone with Jack, always finding excuses to maintain a certain distance. Jack, for his part, was torn between respecting her space and his growing need to know what Lucy had been about to confess. One afternoon, while Jack was waiting for Lucy outside the publishing house to go to dinner, he saw something that left him cold. A man with an intimidating appearance approached Lucy as she was leaving the building. From a distance, Jack could see how Lucy's face paled, how her body tensed in a defensive posture he had never seen before. Without thinking twice, Jack quickly approached. "Lucy, is everything okay?" he asked, protectively placing himself by her side. The man looked Jack up and down, a mocking smile on his lips. Well, Lucy, looks like you've moved up in the world," he said in a tone that made Jack's blood boil. "Leave, Carl," Lucy said, her voice trembling but firm. "You have nothing to do here." Jack understood immediately this was Lucy's ex, the man who had abused her for years. He felt anger growing inside him, but he contained himself, knowing that a confrontation would only make things worse. "You heard her," Jack said, his voice calm but with a steel edge. "It's better if you go. Carl looked at both of them, his smile transforming into a sneer of contempt. "This isn't over, Lucy," he said before turning around and walking away. As soon as Carl disappeared from sight, Lucy collapsed. Jack held her as she trembled, silent tears running down her cheeks. "Come on," he said softly, guiding her towards his car. "I'll take you home." The trip back to Lucy's apartment was silent. Jack could feel the fear and anxiety emanating from her in waves. When they arrived, he accompanied her to her door, unsure if he should leave her alone. "Stay, please," Lucy whispered, and Jack nodded without hesitation. Once inside, Lucy collapsed on the couch, her body still shaking slightly. Jack sat beside her, gently taking her hand. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked softly. Lucy took a deep breath, as if gathering all her strength. "I guess I owe you an explanation," she finally said. "You don't owe me anything, Lucy," Jack replied, "but I'm here to listen if you want to talk." She nodded and began to speak. She told him everything about her relationship with Carl, how it had started charmingly, and how little by little it had turned into a nightmare of control and abuse. She told him about the years of fear, of feeling trapped, of losing her identity. Jack listened in silence, his heart breaking with every word. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to erase all the pain she had suffered. "But there's something else," Lucy finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "Something I've been trying to tell you for days." Jack looked at her, expectant, feeling they were on the brink of something important. Lucy took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. "Jack, when we separated, I was pregnant." The world seemed to stop for Jack. Lucy's words echoed in his head, unable to process them completely. "What?" he finally managed to say, his voice barely audible. "I was pregnant," Lucy repeated, tears running down her cheeks. "With your child. But I was scared, confused, I didn't know what to do, and then I met Carl and he convinced me that I couldn't have the baby, that it would ruin my life." Jack felt like he couldn't breathe. A child, he had had a child and never knew it. What happened to the baby, he asked, fearing the answer. Lucy closed her eyes as if the memory was too painful. "I gave it up for adoption," she finally said. "Carl pressured me, told me it was for the best. I was so lost, so vulnerable, I agreed. But it has been the biggest regret of my life." Jack stood up, needing to move, to process the information. A child, he had a child somewhere. A child he never knew, who grew up without knowing who their biological parents were. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice mixing pain and confusion. "Why did you wait so long?" "I was afraid," Lucy responded, her voice breaking. "Afraid of your reaction, afraid of facing what I had done, and then when you came back into my life helping me, I was afraid of losing you again." Jack turned to her, seeing the pain and regret in her eyes. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to yell at her for hiding something so important, but looking at her, so vulnerable and scared, he could only feel a deep sadness for everything they had lost. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Lucy," he said softly, "I can't say I'm not hurt. This is huge, but I understand why you did it, and I'm not going to leave you alone in this." Lucy looked at him, surprised by his reaction. "You don't hate me?" Jack shook his head. "I couldn't hate you, Lucy, but I need time to process this, and we need to talk more, understand what this means for us, for our future." "Our future?" Lucy asked, a ray of hope in her voice. "Yes," Jack replied firmly, "because despite everything, my feelings for you haven't changed, and now we have to figure out what happened to our child." Lucy nodded, tears of relief and hope mixing with those of pain and regret. "We'll find them," she said, "together." As they embraced, both knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult road. They had to face their past, search for their child, and try to build a future together despite the obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, both Jack and Lucy felt they had the strength to face whatever came, as long as they were together. The days following Lucy's revelation were an emotional whirlwind for both of them. Jack oscillated between shock sadness, and a fierce determination to find his child Lucy. For her part, dealt with a mixture of relief for finally sharing her secret and a deep fear of what the future might hold. Jack decided to take a break from his work to focus on the search. He used all his resources and connections to hire the best private investigators in the country. The task was not easy. More than 10 years had passed since the adoption, and privacy laws made access to records difficult. While the investigators worked, Jack and Lucy spent hours reviewing old documents, trying to remember any detail that might be useful. It was during one of these sessions that Lucy found an old letter she had completely forgotten about. "Jack, look at this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's a letter from the adoption agency. I never opened it. I was too scared at the time." With trembling hands, Jack opened the yellowed envelope. Inside was a brief note and a photograph. The note simply said, "Your son has been adopted by a loving family. We attach a photo for your peace of mind." The photograph showed a baby of about 6 months with big brown eyes and a toothless smile. Jack felt his breath catch. It was the first time he had seen his son. "He looks like you," Lucy whispered, tears in her eyes. Jack nodded, unable to speak. Seeing the photo of his son, a son he had never known, awakened an even greater determination in him. "We'll find him," he finally said, his voice firm. "No matter how long it takes us." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The search proved to be more difficult than they had anticipated. Every lead that seemed promising ended in a dead end. Every time they thought they were close, they found themselves back at square one. Frustration began to take its toll on both of them. Jack became obsessive, spending entire nights reviewing reports and following leads. Lucy, for her part, sank into a spiral of guilt, constantly blaming herself for having given their son up for adoption. It was during one of these low moments that they received the first real clue. One of the investigators had managed to trace the case to a small town in upstate New York. "We have a name," the investigator said over the phone. "The adoptive family's last name is Johnson. They live in Millbrook." Jack and Lucy looked at each other, a mixture of hope and fear in their eyes. They were closer than ever to finding their son, but also closer to facing the reality of what that would mean. "What do we do now?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We go to Millbrook," he said with determination. "It's time to meet our son." As they prepared for their trip to Millbrook, both were aware that they were about to change not only their lives, but also the life of the child they had given up for adoption. The excitement of being close to finding him mixed with the fear of how he would react, how his adoptive family would react. Would he be willing to meet them? Would he hate them for having given him up for adoption? How would this affect the family that had raised him all these years? These questions tormented them as they boarded the plane to Millbrook, towards an uncertain future, but full of possibilities. What they didn't know was that fate had more surprises in store than they could imagine, and that their search was about to take an unexpected turn that would test their love, their determination, and their ability to forgive. The plane landed at Stewart International Airport on a rainy afternoon. Jack and Lucy disembarked with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Millbrook, with its tree-lined streets and historic architecture, seemed a world apart from the bustling New York City they had left behind. They checked into a small bed and breakfast in the center of town, from where they planned to begin their search. The investigator had provided them with an address, 23 Oak Street, the Johnson family's house. "Do you think we should go directly?" Lucy asked as they unpacked in their room. Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lucy had learned to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to run there right now, but what if they're not prepared to see us? What if we scare him?" Lucy nodded, understanding his doubts perfectly. They were the same ones that tormented her. They decided to take a walk around town to clear their heads. As they strolled down the quaint main street, passing by the historic tribute garden, Jack noticed that Lucy was trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked. Taking her hand, Lucy shook her head. "I'm scared, Jack," she admitted. "What if he hates us? What if his adoptive family doesn't want us to approach him?" "Jack, hugged her in the middle of the street, not caring about the curious glances from passers-by. "We can't control how they'll react," he said softly, "but we're in this together. Whatever happens, we have each other." Lucy nodded against his chest, finding comfort in his words and his embrace. When they separated, both felt a little stronger, a little more prepared for what awaited them. They decided that the best approach would be to contact the Johnson family, indirectly. First, Jack used his contacts to arrange a meeting with a local social worker, hoping to obtain more information about the adoption process in the region and hopefully some data about the family they had come to find. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. That night, neither of them could sleep much. Anticipation and nervousness kept them awake, imagining all the possible scenarios they might face. The next morning, they headed to the social services office. The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, greeted them with a kind but professional smile. "I understand you're looking for information about an adoption," she said. After the initial introductions, Jack nodded. "Yes, we're looking for our biological son. He was given up for adoption a little over 10 years ago." Sarah looked at them with a mixture of understanding and caution. "I understand this must be very important to you," she said softly. "But you must understand that adoptions are complex legal processes designed to protect all parties involved, especially the children." Lucy felt her heart sink. "Are you saying we can't find him?" Sarah shook her head. "Not exactly. But the process must follow certain protocols. We can't simply give you information about the adoptive family without their consent." Jack leaned forward. "We understand and respect that. But is there any way you could contact the family on our behalf? Explain the situation to them?" Sarah seemed to consider the idea. "It might be possible," she finally said, "but I would need more details about the adoption. Dates, names, any documents you have." Lucy took out the letter they had found, the one containing the photo of their son as a baby. She handed it to Sarah with trembling hands. Sarah examined the letter and the photo carefully. Suddenly her expression changed. A mixture of surprise and something else that Jack couldn't identify crossed her face. "Is something wrong?" he asked, noticing the change in her demeanor. Sarah looked at them and then looked back at the photo. "I know this child," she finally said. Jack and Lucy looked at each other, surprised. "How is that possible?" Lucy asked Sarah, sighed deeply. "Because I was the one who handled his adoption case and because I've seen him grow up." The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Jack was the first to recover his voice. "What do you mean you've seen him grow up?" Sarah seemed to struggle internally for a moment before responding. "The Johnson family, they're my neighbors. I've seen your son, Michael, grow up all these years." Lucy brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Jack put an arm around her, trying to maintain his composure. "Please," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to know more. How is he? Is he happy?" Sarah looked at them with compassion. "Michael is a wonderful boy, intelligent, kind, full of life. His adoptive parents adore him and have given him a life full of love and opportunities." Lucy cried silently, a mixture of relief and pain in her tears. Knowing that their son was well, that he was happy, was a comfort, but it also made the loss of all those years they hadn't shared with him more real. "What can we do now?" Jack asked. "Is there any way we can meet him?" Sarah looked at them seriously. "This is a very delicate situation. Michael doesn't know he's adopted. His parents have always planned to tell him, but they haven't done it yet. Introducing you into his life now could be very confusing and potentially harmful to him." Jack felt frustration growing inside him. They had come so far, they were so close, and now it seemed there was an insurmountable wall between them and their son. "But he has the right to know the truth," he argued. "We have the right to meet him." Sarah nodded understandingly. "I understand your point of view, but you must also think about what's best for Michael. This kind of revelation can be traumatic if not handled properly." Lucy, who had been silent, finally spoke. What if we wait?" she said softly. "If we give his parents time to tell him the truth?" Jack looked at her, surprised. "Lucy, We've waited so long. She took his hand. I know, but Sarah is right. We have to think about what's best for Michael. We can't burst into his life and turn it upside down. Sarah seemed relieved by Lucy's suggestion. I think that would be the best option. I can talk to the Johnsons, explain the situation to them, give them time to process this information and decide how and when to talk to Michael. Jack wanted to protest, wanted to demand to see his son immediately, but looking at Lucy, seeing the determination and love in her eyes, he knew she was right. They had waited more than 10 years. They could wait a little longer if it meant doing things right. Okay, he finally said, we'll wait. But please keep us informed, and if there's anything we can do. Sarah nodded. I promise I'll do everything I can to handle this in the best way for everyone. Michael is an extraordinary child, and he deserves to know the truth about his origins, but we need to do it the right way. As they left Sarah's office, Jack and Lucy felt overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions. They were so close to their son, and yet they were still so far away, but for the first time in years they had hope. They knew their son was well, that he was happy, and although the road ahead was still uncertain, at least now they had a direction. Do you think we did the right thing? Jack asked as they walked back to their bed and breakfast. Lucy squeezed his hand. I think we're doing what's best for Michael, and that's the most important thing. As they walked through the streets of Millbrook, both wondered if they had ever crossed paths with their son without knowing it. If any of the children they had seen playing in the park or coming out of school could have been Michael. It was an idea that filled them with longing and hope at the same time. What they didn't know was that fate had prepared an encounter that none of them could have anticipated, an encounter that would test their patience, their love, and their ability to forgive. The days in Millbrook turned into a strange mixture of anxious waiting and cautious exploration. Jack and Lucy decided to stay in town, unable to leave, knowing their son was so close. They spent their days walking the tree-lined streets, visiting the local farmers' market, strolling through the Innisfree garden, always with the hope of catching a glimpse of Michael, even if from afar. One afternoon, while walking through, Jack stopped it with his foot. The boy they believed to be Michael ran towards them. Excuse me, sir, can you pass me the ball? He said with a kind smile. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He gently kicked the ball towards the boy. Here you go, he managed to say. Nice game you've got going there. The boy smiled even more widely. Thanks, we're practicing for the school tournament. Do you like soccer? Before Jack could answer, a voice called from the group of children. Michael, come on, it's your turn to kick off. The boy, Michael, they were now sure, waved goodbye and ran back to his friends. Jack and Lucy stood there, stunned by the brief encounter. They had talked to their son, had heard his voice, had seen his smile. It was more than they had expected, and at the same time it wasn't enough. He's perfect, Lucy whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Jack hugged her, feeling his own tears threatening to fall. He is, he agreed, and he seems happy. They watched the game for a while longer, drinking in every movement of Michael, trying to memorize every detail of their son. Finally, when the sun began to set and the children started to disperse, they decided to leave. As they walked back to their bed and breakfast, a whirlwind of emotions enveloped them, joy at having seen their son, pain at not being able to reveal who they were, fear of what the future might hold. Do you think we should tell Sarah we saw him? Lucy asked. Jack thought about it for a moment. Maybe we should. It might help speed things up with the Johnsons. They decided to stop by Sarah's office the next day. When they told her about their encounter in the park, Sarah seemed worried. I understand how difficult this must be for you, she said sympathetically. But you need to be careful. If the Johnsons see you hanging around Michael, they might get scared and complicate things. We weren't hanging around, Jack protested. It was a coincidence. Sarah sighed. I know, but try to understand their perspective. They've raised Michael as their own for over a decade. The idea of his biological parents suddenly appearing in his life is probably terrifying for them. Lucy nodded, understanding. Have you talked to them? Do they know we're here? Yes, I've talked to them, Sarah confirmed. They're processing the information. It's a lot to take in. They've asked for some time to decide how to handle the situation. Jack felt frustration growing inside him. How much longer do we have to wait? We've already lost 10 years. Sarah looked at them with compassion. I understand your impatience. But think about Michael. We need to do this the right way for him. They left Sarah's office feeling discouraged, the joy of having seen Michael now mixed with the frustration of not being able to do anything more. Maybe we should go back to New York, Lucy suggested that night at the bed and breakfast. Being here so close and yet so far is torture. Jack shook his head. I can't leave, Lucy. Not now that we've seen him. What if the Johnsons decide to talk to him? I want to be close. Lucy understood perfectly how he felt. She wanted to stay too, but feared their presence might complicate things. The following days were a test of patience. They tried to keep busy, exploring the town, but their thoughts always returned to Michael. Every child they saw on the street made them turn their heads, hoping it was him. One afternoon, as they were walking through the historic district of Millbrook, Lucy suddenly stopped. Jack, she said, her voice tense. Look. Jack followed her gaze and saw a middle-aged couple walking towards them. Between them was Michael, holding their hands and laughing about something. That's the Johnsons, Lucy whispered. Jack felt his heart race. He wanted to approach them, introduce himself, but he knew he couldn't. Instead, they stood there, paralyzed, watching as the family, their son and the people who had raised him, approached. It was then that Michael saw them. His eyes lit up with recognition. Look, Dad, he said, pulling on the man's hand. It's the man from the park, the one who gave me back the ball. The Johnsons looked in their direction, and Jack could see the exact moment they recognized who they were. The woman tightened her grip on Michael's hand a little, while the man took a protective step forward. For a moment, the five of them stood there in the middle of the street. In a tense silence laden with emotions, Michael, oblivious to the situation, smiled and waved at Jack. It was Mrs. Johnson who broke the silence. Michael, honey, why don't you go look at that candy store over there? Dad and I need to talk to these people for a moment. Michael nodded enthusiastically and headed to the store, but not before saying goodbye to Jack and Lucy with a cheerful, bye. Once Michael was out of earshot, Mr. Johnson spoke, his voice tense but controlled. You're Michael's biological parents, aren't you? Jack nodded, feeling his throat dry. Yes, we are. I'm Jack, and this is Lucy. We didn't mean it wasn't our intention to run into you like this. Mrs. Johnson looked at them with a mixture of fear and defiance. What is it that you want? Sarah told us about you, but we didn't expect to see you like this. On the street. Lucy took a step forward, her eyes full of tears. We're so sorry, we didn't mean to scare you. We just wanted to meet Michael, to know that he's okay. Mr. Johnson's face softened a bit. Michael is more than okay. He's a wonderful boy, happy and loved. We know, said Jack, and we're eternally grateful for that you've given him the life we couldn't give him at that time. An uncomfortable silence fell. The Johnsons seemed to be struggling internally, trying to decide what to do or say next. Finally, Mrs. Johnson spoke. Look, we understand this must be difficult for you, but Michael is our son. We've raised him. We've loved him from day one. You can't just show up and expect... We don't expect anything, Lucy interrupted softly. We just want the opportunity to get to know him, to be part of his life in some way, if possible, but we completely respect that you are his parents. The Johnsons exchanged a look. They seemed to be having a silent conversation. We need time, Mr. Johnson finally said. Time to process all of this, to decide how and when to tell Michael. We can't just turn his world upside down overnight. Jack nodded. We understand and we'll respect your decision, whatever it may be. But please, Lucy added, don't shut us out completely. We've waited so long. Mrs. Johnson seemed to soften a bit. I promise we'll think about it carefully. Michael deserves to know the truth about his origins, but we need to do it the right way, at the right time. At that moment, Michael came out of the candy store, a piece of candy in his hand and a bright smile on his face. The five adults, tensed, aware of how close they were to changing the boy's life forever. Can we go home now, Mom? Michael asked, oblivious to the tension. Surrounding him, Mrs. Johnson forced a smile. Of course, honey, let's go home. Before leaving, Mr. Johnson turned to Jack and Lucy. "We'll let you know our decision through Sarah. Please don't try to contact Michael directly." Jack and Lucy nodded, watching as the family walked away. Michael turned back one last time, waving, "Bye, soccer ball man." When the family disappeared from view, Jack and Lucy collapsed onto a nearby bench, overwhelmed by the intensity of the encounter. "What do we do now?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "We wait, I guess, and we trust that the Johnsons will do the right thing." As the sun set over Millbrook, Jack and Lucy sat there in silence, processing what had just happened. They had been so close to their son, and yet they still felt so far away. But for the first time since they arrived in Millbrook, they felt they had taken a step forward, however small it might be. What they didn't know was that this unexpected encounter had set in motion a series of events that would change their lives, and Michael's forever. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of obstacles and difficult decisions, but now, at least, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The days following the encounter with the Johnsons were an emotional roller coaster for Jack and Lucy. They alternated between hope that the Johnsons would decide to include them in Michael's life, and fear that they would decide otherwise. Every time the phone rang, their hearts skipped a beat, hoping it would be Sarah with news. Meanwhile, they tried to keep themselves busy. Jack worked remotely, managing his company from the small desk in their bed and breakfast room Lucy had started. Writing a journal, pouring into it all the thoughts and emotions she didn't dare express out loud one afternoon. While they were walking through the tribute gardens, Lucy suddenly stopped. "What if we've made a mistake, Jack?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if our presence here only complicates Michael's life?" Jack looked at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" Lucy sighed, sitting down on a nearby bench. "Michael has a good life. He has parents who love him, friends, a stable life. Do we have the right to burst into all of that?" Jack sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "Lucy, Michael deserves to know the truth about his origins, and we deserve the chance to get to know him, to be part of his life in some way." "I know," Lucy said, tears forming in her eyes. "But what if our presence confuses him? What if we do more harm than good?" Before Jack could respond, his phone rang. It was Sarah. "The Johnsons have made a decision," Sarah said without preamble. "They want to meet with you tomorrow at my office." Jack's heart raced. "Have they told you anything else? What's their decision?" "I'm sorry, I can't tell you more," Sarah replied, "but please come prepared for any outcome." After hanging up, Jack relayed the information to Lucy. They looked at each other, a mixture of hope and fear in their eyes. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jack said, squeezing Lucy's hand, "we'll face it together." The night was long and sleepless for both of them. When morning finally came, they headed to Sarah's office with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The Johnsons were already there when they arrived, sitting next to Sarah's desk. The atmosphere was tense, loaded with contained emotions. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began once. Everyone was seated. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson have made a decision regarding the situation with Michael." Mr. Johnson cleared his throat. "We've thought long and hard about this," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and we've decided that we're going to tell Michael the truth about his adoption." Jack and Lucy exchanged a look of surprise and relief. "But," Mrs. Johnson continued, "we want to do it at our own pace, in the way we believe will be least traumatic for him." "Of course," Lucy said quickly, "whatever is best for Michael." Mr. Johnson nodded. "We're going to start by talking to him about adoption in general. Then, little by little, we'll tell him his story, and if everything goes well, if he accepts it and is ready, then you can meet him formally." Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't everything they had hoped for, but it was a start. "Thank you," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to us." Mrs. Johnson looked at them, and for the first time, Jack saw understanding in her eyes. "We know this isn't easy for you either," she said softly, "but Michael is our priority." "And ours," Lucy added. "We only want what's best for him." Sarah, who had been listening in silence, intervened. I think this is a good plan, but we must be prepared for any reaction from Michael. He might accept it easily, or he might have difficulties processing it. Everyone nodded, aware of the delicate situation they were embarking on. How long do you think this whole process will take? Jack asked. The Johnsons looked at each other. We can't put a time frame on it, Mr. Johnson said. It could be a few weeks or it could be months. It will depend on how Michael reacts at each stage. Jack and Lucy nodded, understanding the need for patience. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson said, We think it would be better if you returned to New York. Jack felt his heart sink. The idea of moving away from Michael, now that they were so close, was painful. We understand that you want to be close, she continued, seeing his reaction. But having you here in Millbrook, it's a constant temptation to run into Michael before it's time, and that could complicate things. Lucy took Jack's hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. They're right, she said softly. We must do what's best for Michael. Jack nodded slowly, accepting the logic of the situation, even though his heart protested. We'll keep you informed of every step, Mr. Johnson promised. And when the time is right, we'll call you to come and meet Michael formally. After agreeing on the final details and exchanging contact information, the meeting came to an end. Thoughtfully, I think we're doing what's best for Michael, she replied, and that's the most important thing. Jack nodded, sitting next to her. It's just that now that we've seen him, that we've been so close, the idea of going back to New York and waiting... I know, Lucy said, taking his hand, but think about how far we've come. A few weeks ago, we didn't even know where Michael was. Now not only do we know, but we have the promise that someday we can be part of his life. Jack smiled weakly. You're right. It's just that the wait is going to be difficult. It will be, Lucy agreed, but we'll be in this together, and when the time finally comes to meet Michael officially, it will have been worth every second of waiting. The next morning, as they boarded the plane back to New York, both felt a mixture of emotions, sadness for leaving Millbrook and the thoughtfully, I think we're doing what's best for Michael, she replied. And that's the most important thing, Jack nodded, sitting next to her. It's just that now that we've seen him, that we've been so close, the idea of going back to New York and waiting... I know, Lucy said, taking his hand, but think about how far we've come. A few weeks ago, we didn't even know where Michael was. Now not only do we know, but we have the promise that someday we can be part of his life. Jack smiled weakly. You're right. It's just that the wait is going to be difficult. It will be, Lucy agreed, but we'll be in this together. And when the time finally comes to meet Michael officially, it will have been worth every second of waiting. The next morning, as they boarded the plane back to New York, both felt a mixture of emotions, sadness for leaving Millbrook and the proximity of Michael, but also hope for the future that was opening up before them. The following weeks in New York were an exercise in patience. Jack immersed himself in his work, trying to keep busy. Lucy returned to her job at the publishing house with renewed enthusiasm, channeling her energy into the manuscript she edited every few days. They received an update from Sarah or the Johnsons. The first messages were brief. We've started talking to Michael about adoption in general. He seems curious but doesn't suspect anything yet. Michael asked some questions about adopted children today. He seems to be processing the information well. Each message made their hearts beat faster, knowing they were one step closer to their son. It was almost 2 months after their return to New York when they received the call they had been waiting for. It was Mr. Johnson. We've told Michael about his adoption, he said, his voice a mixture of relief and anxiety. He took it well as can be expected. He has a lot of questions. Of course. Jack and Lucy looked at each other, their eyes full of tears of joy and anticipation. Have you told him about us? Jack asked, barely able to contain his excitement. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yes, Mr. Johnson finally responded. We've told him that his biological parents are looking for him, that they want to meet him. And how did he react? Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. He's curious, Mr. Johnson said. A little scared, a little excited. He has a lot of questions about you. Jack felt his heart swell with love for this child he barely knew, but already loved with all his soul. "What happens now?" he asked. "We think it's time," Mr. Johnson said. "If you're willing, we'd like to arrange a meeting. Something small, informal, so Michael can meet you." Lucy stifled a sob of joy. "Of course," she said. "We'll be there whenever you say." After agreeing on the details, they hung up the phone. Jack and Lucy looked at each other, a mixture of emotions on their faces: joy, fear, anticipation, love. "We're going to meet our son," Jack said, his voice filled with wonder. Lucy nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "After so long, we're finally going to be a family." They embraced, aware that they were on the brink of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter full of challenges, no doubt, but also full of love and possibilities. As they prepared to return to Millbrook, both knew that nothing would ever be the same. The road ahead would be complicated, full of adjustments and learning, but they were ready to face it together with their love for their son as their guide. What they didn't know was that fate had one last surprise in store, a revelation that would test everything they thought they knew about love, family, and forgiveness. The journey back to Millbrook was a mixture of anticipation and nervousness for Jack and Lucy. Each mile that brought them closer to the town also brought them closer to Michael, to the moment they had been waiting for so long. They arrived in Millbrook a day before the scheduled meeting, checking into the same bed and breakfast they had occupied during their previous stay. That night, neither of them could sleep much, their minds filled with questions and imaginary scenarios about how the meeting with Michael would go. The morning of the big day dawned, sunny and warm, as if the weather wanted to reflect the hope they felt. They dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression, but without appearing too formal. "Do you think he'll like us?" Lucy asked as she looked in the mirror, nervously adjusting her blouse. Jack approached her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "He'll love you," he said softly. "You're his mother, after all." Lucy turned in his arms, looking at him with eyes full of emotion. "And you're his father. We're in this together, right?" "Always," Jack replied, kissing her gently. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a park near the Johnsons' house. When Jack and Lucy arrived, they saw the family already seated on a bench near a small pond. Michael was between his adoptive parents, his small figure radiating a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. As they approached, Jack felt his heart beating faster and faster. This was the moment they had been waiting for more than a decade. The Johnsons saw them coming and stood up. Michael looked at them with big, curious eyes, slightly squeezing his adoptive mother's hand. "Michael," Mrs. Johnson said softly, "these are Jack and Lucy. They are your biological parents." There was a moment of silence as Michael looked at them, his eyes moving from one to the other. Lucy held her breath, afraid to make any movement that might scare the boy. Finally, Michael spoke. "Hello?" he said shyly. Are you the ones who had me in your tummy?" Lucy felt tears fill her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "I carried you in my tummy." Michael nodded, processing the information. Then he looked at Jack. "And you're my other dad?" Jack knelt down to be at Michael's level. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Michael looked at both of them for a moment longer, and then, to everyone's surprise, he stepped forward and hugged them. It was a quick hug, almost shy, but it was enough for Jack and Lucy to feel their hearts melt. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of emotions. They all sat down together, and Michael began to ask questions, his natural curiosity overcoming his initial shyness. "Why did you give me up for adoption?" he asked at one point, his voice small but firm. Jack and Lucy exchanged a look. They had anticipated this question, but hearing it from their son's mouth was still painful. "Michael," Lucy began softly, "when you were born, we were very young and we weren't prepared to be parents. We wanted the best for you, and we knew we couldn't give you everything you deserved at that time." "It was the hardest decision we've ever made in our lives," Jack added, "but we did it because we loved you and wanted you to have the best life possible." Michael nodded, seeming to understand despite his young age. "And now," he asked, "do you want to be my parents now?" Lucy felt her heart tighten. "Sweetie, your parents are the ones who have raised and loved you all these years," she said, looking at the Johnsons gratefully. We just want to be part of your life. If you want. Michael seemed to think about this for a moment, like aunts and uncles. He finally asked. Jack smiled, feeling a mixture of pain and relief at the innocence of the question. Something like that, he said. We can be whatever you want us to be. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of conversations, laughter, and some tears. Michael told them about his school, his friends, his hobbies. Jack and Lucy drank in every word, every gesture, trying to make up for a decade of lost moments. When it came time to say goodbye, Michael surprised them again by hugging them on his own initiative. Will I see you again? He asked if you want, and if your parents agree, we'd love to see you again, Jack said, looking at the Johnsons for confirmation. The Johnsons nodded. We can arrange more visits, Mr. Johnson said, step by step. As they watched Michael walk away with the Johnsons, Jack and Lucy stood in silence, overwhelmed by the intensity of the emotions they had experienced. He's perfect, Lucy finally whispered. Jack nodded, hugging her. He is, and he's our son. That night, back at the bed and breakfast, Jack and Lucy talked for hours about the meeting, reliving every moment, every word. They were euphoric, grateful for the opportunity they had been given. But as they prepared for bed, Lucy noticed that Jack seemed thoughtful. What's wrong? She asked. Worried, Jack looked at her, a strange expression on his face. There's something that keeps nagging at me, he said slowly. Something. About Michael, something familiar. What do you mean? Lucy asked, confused. I don't know exactly, Jack replied. It's just a feeling, as if there's something we're overlooking. Lucy frowned, trying to understand. Do you think there's something else we should know? Jack shrugged. Maybe it's nothing, but I can't shake the feeling that there's a piece of the puzzle we're missing. As they lay down to sleep, neither of them could imagine that Jack's feeling was more than just a hunch. It was the prelude to a revelation that would shake the foundations of everything they thought, they knew, a truth that would change the course of their lives forever. The days following their first meeting with Michael were a whirlwind of emotions for Jack and Lucy. They agreed to stay in Millbrook for a while longer, hoping to have more opportunities to see their son, the Johnsons, showing a generosity that Jack and Lucy couldn't help but be grateful for. Agreed to organize more meetings, always under their supervision and with Michael's well-being as the priority. Every time they saw Michael, Jack felt that sense of familiarity grow. There were gestures, expressions, even ways of speaking that seemed strangely familiar to him, but he couldn't place why. One afternoon, after a picnic in the park with Michael and the Johnsons, Jack decided he needed to investigate further. While Lucy was taking a nap at the bed and breakfast, he headed to Sarah's office, the social worker who had handled Michael's adoption. Jack, Sarah said, surprised to see him, I wasn't expecting you today. Is everything okay? Jack sat down, feeling uncomfortable but determined. Sarah, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Sarah looked at him, cautiously. Of course, what is it about? Is there anything else I should know about Michael's adoption? Anything that maybe Lucy or I haven't been told? Sarah seemed to tense slightly. Jack, all the relevant information about Michael's adoption has already been provided to you. I don't understand what else you could be looking for. But Jack wasn't satisfied. There was something in Sarah's reaction that fueled his suspicion. Sarah, please, if there's anything else, I need to know. It's important. Sarah looked at Jack for a long moment, as if she was fighting an internal battle. Finally, she let out a deep sigh and got up to close her office door. There is something, she said quietly, sitting back down. Something that wasn't told to you or Lucy. Something that the Johnsons don't know either. Jack felt his heart speed up. What is it, Sarah? Please tell me, Sarah. Closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, she looked directly at Jack. Michael. Michael is not Lucy's biological son. The words fell like a bomb in the small office. Jack felt the world stop around him. What? He finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. But Lucy was pregnant. She gave Michael up for adoption. Sarah nodded slowly. Yes, Lucy was pregnant, but there were complications during the delivery. The baby didn't survive. Jack felt like he couldn't breathe. Then how? There was another baby, Sarah continued, her voice laden with emotion. A baby born on the same day, in the same hospital. His mother died during childbirth, and he had no other relatives. When Lucy decided to give her baby up for adoption, the doctors, they made a decision. Jack stood up from his chair, unable to sit. Still, are you telling me they gave Lucy a baby that wasn't hers? That they lied to her? Sarah nodded, tears forming in her eyes. They did it with good intentions. They thought it would be better for everyone. Lucy wouldn't have to deal with the loss of her baby, and the other baby would have a chance to have a family. Jack ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the information. But I am Michael's father, right? Sarah shook her head. No, Jack. Neither you nor Lucy are biologically related to Michael. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack sat down again, feeling completely overwhelmed. Why are you telling me this now? He finally asked. Sarah looked at him sadly. Because you deserve to know the truth, and because Michael might need this information in the future, for medical reasons. Jack nodded mechanically, his mind still trying to process the enormity of what he had just discovered. What do I do now, Sarah? He asked, his voice breaking. How do I tell this to Lucy? To the Johnsons? To Michael? Sarah leaned forward, taking Jack's hands in hers. You don't have to make any decisions right now. Take your time to process this, and when you're ready, I'll be here to help you navigate this situation. Jack left Sarah's office feeling as if he were in a dream. The streets of Millbrook seemed unreal, blurry. His mind kept spinning around the revelation. As he walked back to the bed and breakfast, a new reality began to settle in him. Michael, the boy he had come to love as a son in these few weeks, was not biologically his nor Lucy's. But that didn't change the feelings they had developed for him and Lucy. How was he going to tell Lucy that the son she thought she had given up for adoption had never existed? That she had been carrying the guilt and pain of that decision for more than a decade, all based on a lie? When he arrived at the bed and breakfast, Lucy was waiting for him, a smile on her face that quickly faded when she saw his expression. Jack, what's wrong? She asked, worried. You look like you've seen a ghost. Jack looked at her, his heart breaking for the pain he knew he was about to cause her, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth from her. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. Lucy, he said softly, taking her hands in his, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. And so, with the sun setting over Millbrook, Jack began to tell a story that would change their lives forever. A story of loss, of deception, but also of love and the true nature of family. What neither of them knew at that moment was that this revelation, although painful, would open the door to a new understanding of love and family, and would lead them to make decisions they never would have imagined. The silence that followed Jack's revelation was deafening. Lucy stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and pain. No, she finally whispered. It can't be true. Jack moved closer to her, trying to take her in his arms, but Lucy stepped back. Don't touch me, she cried, tears beginning to run down her cheeks. How can you tell me this? How can you tell me that the child I carried in my womb, the child I gave up for adoption, never existed? Lucy, please, Jack pleaded. I know it's hard to believe, but Sarah confirmed it. She has the records. No, Lucy interrupted. It can't be true. I felt him grow inside me. I felt him move. I gave birth to him. Jack felt his own heart breaking as he watched. Lucy's pain. I know, love, and I'm so sorry, but our baby didn't survive. Lucy collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Jack knelt beside her, wrapping her in his arms. This time, she didn't push him away. They spent hours like this, embracing on the floor of the bed and breakfast room, crying together for the child they had lost without knowing it, for the years of guilt and regret based on a lie, for the cruel irony of having found a child they believed to be theirs, but who turned out not to be. When they finally calmed down, Lucy looked at Jack with red-rimmed eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Jack shook his head. "I don't know," he admitted. "But what I do know is that no matter what we decide, we'll do it together." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Jack and Lucy had long conversations with Sarah, reviewing the records, trying to understand how and why such a drastic decision had been made. It was a mistake, Sarah admitted, a well-intentioned mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. The doctors thought they were doing what was best for everyone. But the knowledge of the good intentions behind the decision didn't make it any easier to accept. Lucy spent days alternating between anger, pain, and deep depression. Jack did his best to support her, but he himself was struggling with his own emotions. In the midst of all this was Michael, the boy they had come to love, whom they had believed to be their biological son, but who they now knew was not. What did this mean for their relationship with him? It was during one of their long nighttime conversations when Lucy asked the question they had both been avoiding. "What do we tell Michael?" she asked. Jack felt something loosen in his chest. "Are you saying we should keep the secret?" Lucy shook her head. "No, not exactly. I think we should tell the Johnsons the truth. They deserve to know, and Michael might need that medical information in the future, but maybe we don't need to change anything else." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we can continue to be part of Michael's life, exactly as we have been until now, as additional figures in his life, not to replace his parents, but to complement them." Jack considered this for a moment. "And what about our biological child, the one we lost?" Lucy took his hand, tears forming in her eyes. "We'll mourn him," she said softly. "We'll remember him, but we won't let that loss prevent us from loving Michael or being part of his life if he wants us in it." Jack felt his heart swell with love for this incredible woman. Text here. Despite all the pain and confusion, she still found the strength to love, to think about what was best for everyone. "You're amazing, you know that," he said, gently kissing her hand. Lucy smiled weakly. "I'm not amazing. I'm just trying to do the right thing." The following days were a whirlwind of difficult conversations, first with Sarah, then with the Johnsons. As expected, the Johnsons were shocked and confused by the revelation. But after the initial shock, they showed an understanding and compassion that Jack and Lucy couldn't help but admire. "Michael is our son," Mr. Johnson said, firmly. "It doesn't matter where he came from. We've raised him. We've loved him from day one. That's not going to change." "And you're still welcome in his life," Mrs. Johnson added, surprising everyone. "You've shown how much you love Michael. He deserves to have all the love possible in his life." The decision not to tell Michael the full truth, at least for now, was made jointly by all the adults involved. They agreed that when Michael was older and could better understand the situation, they would revisit this decision. Meanwhile, Jack and Lucy committed to being a constant and loving presence in Michael's life, not as biological parents, but as additional figures of love and support. When the time finally came to return to New York, Jack and Lucy felt different. They had come to Millbrook looking for the son they thought they had given up for adoption. They were leaving with their hearts broken for a child they never got to know, but also full of love for a boy who, although he didn't share their blood, had become an important part of their lives. At the airport, as they waited for their flight, Lucy looked at Jack. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked Jack, hugged her, gently kissing her forehead. "I think we'll be more than okay," he replied. "We've been through a lot, but we've done it together, and now we have Michael in our lives. Different circumstances, different roles, but still, it's a blessing." Lucy nodded, resting her head on Jack's shoulder. "You're right, it's not the family we expected, but it's the family we have, and I love it." As they boarded the plane, both felt they were closing a chapter in their lives and beginning a new one. A chapter full of challenges, no doubt, but also full of love, second chances, and a new understanding of what it really means to be a family.